If there was something Ronie wanted more than anything, it was for her first date with the love of her life to be as perfect as it could be, as if she were to write a novel about it. It wasn't like that was the sole reason she wanted their date to go perfectly. Having a muse for a best-selling novel, that is. It was barely even a blip on the radar. Ronie, more than anything, just wanted nothing to go wrong for the first time ever since she began dating. For as long as Ronie could remember, which was as far back as 3rd grade, all of her love interests, whether they bothered to reciprocate or not, had met with horrible ends that Ronie felt was inexplicably connected to her. Thomas was her first crush in 3rd grade, and she'd been glad to her marrow when he'd asked her on a play date a few weeks after school had resumed after summer break. However, her joy didn't last long as Thomas's parents, for no apparent reason, sent Ronie and her mom away when they arrived at their doorstep that Saturday afternoon. Ronie's mom wasn't happy about having driven halfway across town just to be turned away at the door with a hostility that had been as chilly as the weather. And she blamed it all on poor Ronie. Ronie's young heart was broken even before it had the chance to properly beat for a boy. She spent the rest of the weekend moping around dejectedly and was reluctant to go to school on the Monday that followed. The first thing the teacher announced when she walked into the classroom that morning was of the passing of Thomas and his parents. While other students were unfamiliar with the concept of death, Ronie knew, by experience with her father, that when someone is said to have gone to be with the angels, it meant they were never coming back. She didn't know how to feel about the news, but when the evening news reported the bizarre suicide of not only Thomas, but also his parents, Ronie couldn't help but feel horrible. Years later, Donald, the most popular senior in high school, had suffered a similar fate when she trusted him with her heart and body, only for him to betray her trust and leak their illicit video to the entire school. Ronie was shattered by the pure evil of such a deed, and she begged her mom to be transferred, but to no avail. Donald's victory hadn't lasted long. He died in such a horrible way that the police barely had enough to autopsy and had bizarrely categorized it as a suicide. Even though a part of Ronie wanted to feel relief that karma had worked on her behalf, she couldn't help but feel she had a part to play in Donald's death. The first 2 men that had broken her heart, her father and Thomas, had also met with gruesome ends that had been labeled as suicide. It just couldn't be a coincidence that Donald had met with a similar fate. With the words of her mother playing on in her mind about being cursed, Ronie became resolute in her intention to steer clear of any kind of emotional entanglement from then on. But it seemed as though fate, or whatever it was that was killing people on her behalf, was not done with her. For even though she had tried to keep her one-sided crush for Louis at bay, her sophomore year project partner, unbeknownst to her, sent him a love letter on her behalf. To his credit, he let Ronie down gently and told her he wasn't interested in any relationship whatsoever. But even that slight hurt she felt from such a polite denial was enough to trigger whatever curse that followed her around like the plague. He hadn't lasted until the next morning. Neither had Fred, on the night she'd caught him cheating at the end of their 2-year-long relationship. Both Louis and Fred had burned to death, but the report still claimed that they, somehow, had done that to themselves. Even though Ronie had a good feeling about the man she was dating online for over 8 months now, she couldn't help but feel worried. What if he didn't show? What if he showed up and wasn't who he claimed to be? What if he disappointed her? It felt like she was endangering him just by allowing herself to fall for him. But that was something outside her control. She met him while searching the dark web, trying desperately to find a cure for her curse. But even after he had messaged her, and she had confided in him her story, he still offered to be a friend. Alonzo had been a godsend for the past 8 months, a gentleman through and through, and he was cool with her curse, and said time and again that his knowledge of it would keep him grounded and discourage him from hurting her. Yet she was still feeling uneasy as she drove to the fancy restaurant she had picked for them to meet in. It wasn't until she found him seated at a table, dressed in a pristine tuxedo, that she finally let out the breath she didn't know she was holding. She took in a few more deep breaths and strode up to the table to meet him. "You're stunning in person," Alonzo greeted her with, and Ronie blushed in response. The date went perfectly. They had amazing conversation, ate good food, and even played around with the idea of taking a long walk. It wasn't until they were both in Ronnie's car a few minutes to midnight, when Ronie had been expecting him to give in to her advances and start to make out with her, that Alonzo made his confession. She could feel the joy that had been building up all night inside her begin to evaporate. "I was there when Thomas and his family died. It wasn't suicide. It was murder. But I've never been able to prove it, even though I've followed you like a shadow all these years. I don't know how you live with yourself after doing the things you do to the same people you claim to love. But I'm here to return the favor, just like you did decades ago when you killed off the only family that took me in when nobody else would." Before Ronie could blink, least of all process this new information, Alonzo drew out a dagger and stabbed her in the neck. As she choked on her own blood, he put a note in her hand and sat, watching her gurgling until she breathed her last. And then he left. It was the same note that Ronie had left at the scene of every kill she'd made in the past. "I love you to death."
Subscribe today or beware.